Okay, let's go. So welcome everyone. I'm Frederic. I'm working for EUFIC. I think most of you already know EUFIC, but we're going to introduce ourselves a bit later. We are going to talk today about food additives as a whole, but emulsifiers more precisely. I know it's a niche topic, but you'll understand why we chose this topic today. And just remember that we won't save emulsifiers today. The point is for all of us to actually have more clues about how to talk, how to communicate around emulsifiers. That's the point of those communication labs that we are hosting here at EUFIC. Normally it should last for 2 hours, and you will have the full replay available in a few days or weeks after the end of the event, along with a little report on what's being said here. So no need to take too many notes. Just be focused. We will send you a report afterwards. Little bit about EUFIC, who we are. We are a European NGO. Our public health mission is to help consumers understand the food and health science behind the food globally to make it more accessible and more easy to understand. What we strive for is somehow, okay, is the utopia is the world where everyone live healthier, at least in the European Union, and more sustainable lives because we all have the information to do so. And how we deal with our mission is to facilitate healthier and more sustainable diets through science-based information and science-based activities. We have four long-term goals at EUFIC. The first is really about literacy, about information, how to build food and health literacy, and as well, so that's in citizens, but as well how to promote evidence-based decision making in policymakers, for example. So our targets are not usually only the general public. Our second long-term goal is our studies. Most of us at EUFIC are scientists, is to facilitate the healthy and sustainable diet shift. The third long-term goal, of course, is to support the prevention of evitable disease, we'd say. And our fourth one that we won't talk too much, we don't know today about this, but it's to limit food waste generation at the consumer level. Very quick about the communication labs. It's a methodology that we tried several years ago on a European project. The main point is of course, is to improve the public communication. Public could be from any stakeholders, of course, everything that is public information on polarized topics, and most of them are risk related. So if there is a risk and as well a risk of miscomprehension by the general public, then we find a use to host some kind of communication activities. What we do, so it's what we do today. We stage an expert discussion. We pass a survey between each other just to collect a little bit of data, and we exchange a lot as well with our experts. And the point, of course, is to shape communication recommendations at the end of this webinar and the next one. And if we have enough data from this webinar, maybe we will host a second one that will be a more workshop designed, closed one, to really emit recommendations for journalists, for healthcare professionals. We will see according to the results that we have. Today's agenda. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. We have four top level experts today. We will begin with a sociologic point of view on naturalness, artificialness of food. Then Serge will give us a bit of a hint about the global trends in scientific publication around emulsifiers in the world, of course. Then we will have a little interactive session where you guys all in the attendance, you will be able to answer some of our questions through Slido. Then Martha from Cargill, she will talk a bit about the point of view of industries and how complex or how challenging it is now to face or to deal with emulsifiers issues, how to replace them, should we replace them as well, how to talk about this, of course. And then Anna Maria, she will tell us a lot about the current food homologation system, food risk assessment system that is EFSA based, and especially on emulsifiers. Where are we right now, science speaking? And then we will have a little discussions between all of us, all the experts and you guys. Of course, please, during any presentations, please do ask questions, specific questions on the presentations or more global ones, more abstract ones if you want, through the chat. And during the panel discussions, we will try to answer the most of them, at least the most relevant ones. Okay, just a little question now for you guys. So all of you guys in the attendance, you can you can join the Slido. In the chat, you have the link if you are on desktop, and if you want, you can as well snap the QR code with your smartphone and begin answering the question. So the first question, if you see it, is to type in as many different emulsifiers as you've heard of. Any kind of things that you think could be used as emulsifier as well. Okay, so this is where you see that the audience is actually quite qualified, huh? Of course, most of those emulsifiers that you are citing are the vernacular names of emulsifiers that are food additives. But as you know, you have already, we will talk about this later. You have a lot of natural emulsifiers that are not listed as food additives, that could be used as food additives as well. That's really useful that you are giving us this information, so we know where to start. I see that mustard has been cited a lot as well, and this is what we are going to talk about as well today, huh? How to communicate about emulsifiers that chemically look a lot alike, but whose names are more familiar or not. And maybe those will be more or less accepted by different kinds of publics. Sophie, you can, thanks a lot, guys, for answering this. There will be another Slido session a bit later on. Sophie, can you start your own presentation?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Oh, no, I don't have the right to share my screen. Can you?
Now you should.
Right, please. Okay. Yes, that's okay. And now, can you see it's full screen? Yes, okay. Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you very much to EUFIC and to Frederic for inviting me to this seminar. So I am a sociologist, so I will be talking about additives, but more broadly on the general context of food industrialization. So consider my speech as a broad introduction to this very interesting seminar. Thanks again for inviting me. So first, I will briefly review some socio-historical elements. Then I will address the controversy about ultra-processed foods. And finally, I will deepen the perceptions of today's population, mostly in France, because I am French, and as a sociologist, I do all my interviews in France, but I'll try, or we can discuss also the European dimension. So to start with, some socio-historical elements, we usually consider that food industrialization started with the discovery or the invention of canned food. Canned food at the very end and very beginning of the 18th and 19th century by Nicolas Appert, because it allowed food to be exported and to be preserved for a very long time. So we consider basically that it's been a bit more than 2 centuries that food can be produced on an industrial scale. And what's interesting is to see that fears, that anxiety towards these foods are quite old. Since the very beginning of food industrialization, we see first traces of fears, of doubts. For example, we have a French historian, Martin Bruegel, who worked on fears in French army, and he showed that the first canned meals were questioned about what was inside. So, of course, the additives and so on, but also the type of meat people could find inside. And for example, they did not believe that it was beef, but they feared that it could be cat or maybe monkey. Just to show you that, and this was at the very end of the 19th century, so it's been quite a long time since we have those kind of fears about what is industry putting in our meals and so on. At the beginning of the 20th century, the fears grew so big that the law needed to regulate the market, and we had a first law on food fraud in 1905 to define what was the standard, what is a real milk, a real wine, and so on. And a few years later, we had the first law on food additives in 1912 that regulates packaging, labeling, and also what kind of additives could be added into what kind of food in 1912. So it's been more than 100 years that people are questioning food additives and that there are laws about how we can use them in what kind of food products and so on. And just one last example to show you that those fears and questions are quite old. This on the right, you can see a small leaflet that was distributed in France in 1931. And this paper says how are we poisoned by chemical foods? This is the title. And the subtitle is chemical foods are being deadly and they create deathful diseases, basically. And this was distributed everywhere in France in the 30s. So that's just to show you that the discourse we had 100 years ago, we still have it today. But at that time, and the first half of the 20th century and at the end of the 19th century, the criticism remained marginal. It means that it was the trust towards progress, towards technology that was prevailing. Those fears that they were existing, but they were not the main way of seeing food industrialization. And this changed around the 60s and 70s. In the 60s and the 70s, the first wave of major criticism grew louder. We can see that in like famous movies such as Soil and Green. Also, we had the first international scandals pointing out food industry, such as the Nestlé scandals in the 60s. And in France, we had the invention of the word junk food, malbouffe. So junk food in French was invented in the 70s to basically to point the bad nutritional quality of food produced by the industry. So in the 60s and 70s, the criticism grew louder, but the question was not really directly the additives, but more on the nutritional quality of the food that was processed by food industry. Yeah. And now, like for a few years, as you know, we had major scandals, starting with the mad cow at the very end of the 20th century. And all those crises and scandals, they led to an increase into the anxiety that people felt. So in France, but in Europe in general, we observe this increase into food anxiety. This food anxiety is mostly focused on processed food and on what people call industrialized food. what is different in the criticism we have today in France and in Europe compared to the criticism in the 60s and 70s is that it's not only on the nutritional side anymore, it's also on like the toxicological side. Can I be really sick because I am contaminated by this substance or this one? There is still the nutritional dimension, but two other dimensions, like the political and moral critique, meaning is this food good for the people producing it? Is it fair, economically speaking, but also ethically speaking? And the ecological critique that is really a distinction of today society. The environmental critique is gaining ground in the 21st century, and it's really something that is specific to the way we see and we question today's food industry. That was not so prevailing. That was not prevailing as much in the 70s. So that's it for the socio-cultural elements. Just to tell you, maybe, and I will talk about that again, but that those kind of criticism, they are led mostly by people that have a high level of diploma. Now, everyone, like in France, every population have a tendency to be to be critics towards food industry, but the discourses and the spreading of those critiques are led mostly by high level of diploma, people with high level of diploma. So where are we exactly today, and how are we talking about food additives and processed foods? The major discourse and the major question today are surrounding what we call ultra processed foods. So how is this new discourse has it been built and so on? It started in 2009 with the first paper of Carlos Monteiro. Carlos Monteiro is a Brazilian researcher, a Brazilian scientist, and he developed this way of categorizing foods according to the level of food processing. So he basically distinguished raw foods and ultra-processed food level 4, raw food level 1, ultra-processed food level 4. And what's interesting to analyze is the fact that this concept has like widespread very quickly internationally and very quickly. And this is a graph showing the number of scientific paper published with this concept of ultra-processed food since 2009 until 2024. We can see a real increase into the number of scientific publications. But despite the number increasing quite quickly, there are many debates. Basically, some scientists say that ultra-processed food is only a way of denouncing the bad nutritional quality of processed foods. And they are also saying that it's not really precise, that it's hard to know if this product is classified here or there or there. So there are still debates in the scientific area. But it's used more and more in scientific publication, showing, of course, a lot of links between health question and food consumption. This is just to show you like how in France and when the concept arrived, the media played a major role, but we have a gap in 2018. It's really when the concept started to widespread in France, and the date may be a bit different depending on which European country you're looking at, but it's quite recent everywhere. The industrial area is interesting to look at because we have at least two completely different positions. Some of the food industries saw the arrival of this new concept of ultra-processed food as a competitive advantage. They considered that they could reformulate their own products, maybe removing some additives, and they just show people the work that is done around this question. Some others, like the other position the food industry could take, is to do some lobby to explain all the limits of this new concept of ultra-processed food. And finally, in the political arena, at least in France, but also in Britain and also in the Scandinavian countries, there are some political will try maybe to implement this concept into the public policies, but they are still debating about the possibility to implement it and to use it on an everyday basis. And in France, we have basically a debate between the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Agriculture, who are not on the same page completely on that question. Some are defending more the health question, and some others the fact that it's easy to use for the industry, for the people, and so on. So a new concept that is spreading really quickly, but with major debate on that. So what is interesting to keep, first, the idea that it spreads really quickly thanks to precise actors, and the fact that this rapid spread reflects, in fact, I think, contemporary fears about food ingredients. If the concept of ultra-processed food was so quick to spread everywhere, it's because we had fears already about what is food additive, like what are food additives and their consequences, and so on. Because if no one cared about food additives and food processing, basically, we would not have had this very quick spread of ultra-processed food concept. And now I will deepen more the fears and the perception of food processing in two populations, and basically mostly in French population. So as a sociologist, I went to see different people and do a big survey on how they perceive and how they classify, how they define what is food processing, and are food additives playing a role into how people classify food additives. And I found different ways of categorizing what is food processing and what is not. Some are explicit. It means that you have official documents, official references telling you this is class 1, class 2, class 4, and so on. This is considered as processing. This is not considered as processing, and so on. So we have the public health, the legal register, the paramedical register, also the technological register used by food industry engineers, for example. And on an implicit side, meaning that it's more of cultural and symbolic dimension, we have the culinary way of defining what is processed or not, the way of distinguish what is processed or not by actor, and another quantified way opposing raw food and very processed food, let's say. So for example, once I did an interview with a mother that was a secretary and her son, who is a food engineer. And they were debating about is flour a processed food or not. And the mother, who is not really who has a low level of diploma, was using the culinary way of classifying what is processed food or not. So she said, no, the flour is not processed because I haven't cooked it yet. Whereas the son, who is a food engineer, told her, yes, it is processed because we had made many operations about the flour and so on. This is just to explain how we have sometimes misunderstanding between different types of actor, and especially between food industry and other people, because everyone has its own way of categorizing what is processed, what is not processed, and so on. And for some people, additives will play a role, while for others, they don't care about additives. The question is just to see if the texture is really fluid or if it's solid and so on. Yes. Okay. This is the first aspect. Now, what about ultra processed in today's population? Even if there are those different ways of looking at what is processed and what is not processed, we can see that for a few years now, this idea of and this concept of ultra processed food is gaining ground, at least in the French population. It is known more and used more and more. And even if when people are not using the word ultra processed food, they are more and more opposing what is natural and what is processed, what is industrial and what is coming from another actor. So it's a way of looking at food that is spreading in France, but in Europe in general. And this tendency to oppose industrial and natural is interesting because it's more and more seen as a norm. It means that if you want to see as someone, as a good citizen, basically, you more and more you will be expected to feel disgust towards what is called industrial in the upper class. In the upper social class, you have this idea that if you want to be seen as someone good, you are supposed to be disgusted more and more by food containing additives and food that are considered as industrial. I wanted to read a short, a short extract of someone. So I asked him, can you tell me the first three words that come to mind when you think of industrial food? The first three ideas or images that come to your mind. And this 25 years old man, he answered, I am thinking of mayo. You know that huge pot where you put all the ingredients. You have a huge mixer that makes you a mayo there and in the jar in a conveyor belt. When you say industrial food, I think of sauces. You put them everywhere in sandwiches. You find them everywhere in food station, blah, blah, blah. And I think of the documentary Food Inc. It is the food industry in the human world. You get out of there and you're like, oh, maybe I should have been born a badger. At least I would have had a carbon footprint like that. At least I wouldn't have perpetrated the slavery of things like that. At least I would have contributed to the fact that we force feed G's for Christmas. This is French. All of this is filmed. They feed you images, the inconsistency of this stuff. You're like, wow, you freak out, you get out, and you cry. So this is very extreme, of course, but it's just to show you how this discourse has become like the social norm today in the younger, maybe in the younger generation, but also in the population with the middle or high level of diploma. But on the other side, we can also observe resistance to this major discourse. Some people will express food pleasure to transgress this new norm, and they will tell you, okay, I just feel pleasure eating my Nutella. Please let me alone. I would like to enjoy my food, and I feel like you are intruding in my intimity when you are telling me how I'm supposed to eat and so on. And because we are talking about additives, I would like to read you another verbatim from two young ladies that are basically they are from families with a high level of diploma, let's say. So I asked them, I gave them pasta box, so basically pasta in boxes. I think this is everywhere in Europe, but and I asked them if they agreed to eat the pasta. And the first one told me, pasta box for life, guys. The other one, it is the blood. I'm like, I wonder, are you okay with tasting it? Both of them, yes. Oh yes, no problem. It is so good. Is it so good? But because it's super simple, it's full of plastic and all kind of craps and all additives. But when you eat it, her friend, that's right, it's pasta, but like, it's sweet and sour prawns at the same time, something crazy, you don't know. So I asked them again, but do you like the taste? Both of them, oh yeah, But yeah, oh yeah, no, we like it, and the additives they do the job. The other, oh yes, we call them the amittives. So ami in French means friends. So when they say amitive, it's like friends ditives. If I could translate that in English, so they are playing with this idea of we know that there are additives inside, and we enjoy it, and we want to express that because we want to transgress this norm and this discourse that can be very moralizing. So this is the first aspect. And another aspect interesting to discuss to me on the resistance discourse towards the disgust of food additives and food industries is a profile of basically engineers that show a very high level of trust into technology. So just be aware then when you have a high level of diploma, and especially if you are working into industries in general, or if you are working with technology, you have more chances of being trustful with the industry. So here is an example of an engineer, a man that worked into thermal equipment industry, and he was completely amazed when I showed him some ham, some vegetable ham, let's say. Uh, and I wanted to read you another verbatim. It's a technician in food science, and she said so. She's a food scientist, and she tells us about ultra processed. She says it's my skills, it's my know-how, it's my reason for getting up in the morning, it's my reason for coming to work. We can do so many things. We have to say that it's beautiful. We only see the negative. But we have to say that there is a positive side. For example, meat analogs are ultra processed, but they are also beautiful in all their complexity. So there is a kind of fascination towards food formulation, food additives, and food industry, but this fascination is felt by a very specific profile. Um, so this confidence is mostly felt by people with a high level of diploma and a high level of income sometimes, but mostly high level of diploma. And yeah, and it's characterized by the scientific culture, let's say. And now I'm at the end of my presentation. So just to repeat the key messages. First one, doubts about processing food have existed since the beginning of industrialization, but the contemporary criticism is characterized by its multiplicity and especially the place of environmental questions. And second point, we observe social disparities into first the way food processing are perceived and defined, and also on the place of the trust that can be given to food technologies, food innovation, and food additives. If you want more details, there is a paper online about those emotions felt towards food processed, like food, industrial food, and what is called sustainable food. Thank you again for the invitation, and I will stay until the end if you have a question and if you need some other information.
Thank you so much, Sophie. It's super interesting on this sociologist point of view. That's why we wanted for Sophie to be heard because it gives hope somehow. It shows that cultural norms, like the current one, which is rejecting ultra-processed foods or food additives, those cultural norms will always be questioned, even by the new generations as well. And that we could find ways to make the debate more science-based, more nuanced, through this food processing praising that we can see emerging even punctually in new generations, for example. So it's super interesting. Thanks a lot. Let's move on. I think we are already late. Serge, can you can you take back the mic, please? Yes,
And
perfect.
you see my presentation? Everything's okay?
Yes, as well. Perfect.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. So I can start. Well, thank you all to be there and the EUFIC for inviting me. I will try to present you an overview of the state of the art of the research on emulsifier. You will see that it's not an easy topic. It's very active. There are many subjects. So I will try to give you an overview, but first, in a few words, just to explain you what is Science Protect. Science Protect is a platform that I've created in 2019. And the idea was to use AI to monitor scientific trends on nutrition and food safety. So we were there before the boom of the generative AI, and now we have integrated this new technology in our platform. And I will try to explain you just in a few words what we are doing. In fact, as you know, there are many topics, substances, issues to monitor when you are doing food. And you have pesticides, food contact materials, health claims, contaminants, food additives, nutrients, and different foods. And what we're trying to do is to help our client, mainly the food industry and the retailers, to identify what's new in science. There are around 700 scientific publications every year on food and health. And the big question, of course, you can ask ChatGPT what's new in science, but in fact, it's much more complicated than this. And we try to anticipate, to monitor, and to analyze these trends to help our client to detect emerging issues. And in fact, Science Protect is not just like any other AI tool. It's the first thing, it's a database. And I will explain you an original database. Because the first thing, when you are trying to analyze science, you need good data. And then the idea is to have a corpus of reliable scientific data. So we use a scientific database. We take the scientific studies, and then we analyze them, and we classify them with AI, with what we call large language models, like ChatGPT. It's an example of a LLM. And then we have algorithm agents, trackers, to detect changes in the science, to make bibliography. And we have crisis detection algorithms to identify what's new or what's important in science and what is changing the game for our clients. And really the important thing is here you have an idea of the architecture of a database. Sorry, it's blurred because it's our knowledge, our know-how. But in fact, we are identifying all the links, all the relation between a food, a substance, an health effect, and a mechanism. And it's how we can help AI to have reliable results when we are talking about when we are trying to explore the links between food, nutrients, contaminants, pesticide, and on health topics. And this is what we use to monitor these things. So now we are going more into our the subject of the day, emulsifiers. And you can see that we have more than 1,200 studies on emulsifiers just here in PubMed. And the first thing that you can see when we are looking at this graph is that it's a really new issue. Before 2010, there were almost no publications on emulsifiers. And you see, but if we were looking at food additives, we have the same kind of profile. This is really the typical profile of an emerging subject. Emulsifiers are not new, but the scientific debate is quite new. And you see that in well, most studies are being published in 12 or 15 years, in 10 or 15 years, and this is typical of an emerging study. The second thing where we are looking at, so first thing we look at just the trend, and we look at the pathologies, the risks which are associated with emulsifiers. And the second thing that you can see is that there are many subjects. You have metabolic disease, type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, dyslipidemia, gastrointestinal effect, increased intestinal permeability, barrier dysfunction, dysbiosis, mucus layer invasion, colitis, etc. Immune and inflammatory disease, neurological effect, cognitive decline, neuroinflammation, brain barrier disruption, cellular aging. And for us, because we are monitoring many issues, this is typical of a trendy issue and of a crisis issue. Because when you have so many topics, so many pathologies which are studied, this means that this is a trendy issue for the research. And this is not the typical, well, if we were looking, I don't know, like at a pesticide, specific pesticide in general, you have one major issue, for instance, cancer. And almost all these studies are on this pesticides and cancer. Here you see that there is a very large number of issues, pathologies. And here you have what we call the risk profile. What we do is that we calculate the share of research on each pathology. And to do this, this is something really important because we all know that all scientific studies don't have the same quality, the same weight in terms of scientific evidence. And we attribute a weight for each study between 0 to 1. And just to explain you how we proceed, 1 is for a scientific study which is published in a very high impact factor study like the Lancet or Nature, and with a very strong methodology. So if it's a randomized controlled trials with a lot of with many subjects in this study published in a very high impact factor study, then we will be close to 1. If it's just an in silico study in a low reputation or low impact factor journal, then the weight will be close to 0. And then we accumulate this weight and we look at the share of research. And here you see that most studies are on allergy, immunity, or the studies on immunity, inflammation, this kind of studies. Digestive, of course, all the studies on gut. And then you have diabetes and obesity and cancer, which are coming just behind. So you really see that the research are on all the debate on inflammation, gut barrier, microbiota, and we'll go a little bit more in detail to understand what are the studies talking about. If we look at the mechanisms which are listed in the studies, you'll see that the top mechanism is on gut microbiota. So the studies are most studies are on emulsifiers on the microbiota. What they are doing at the digestion level, because most of them are not absorbed. So this is really the impact on microbiota and the mucus barrier disruption. This is really microbiota, mucus barrier disruption, and epithelial, the gut epithelia. And you see that there are many mechanistic subjects which are studied in the study, the diversity of the microbiota, the impact on pro-inflammatory genes, second bile acids, alterated short chain fatty acid profiles, etc. And so this is really at this level that the studies are conducted. And this is really complex because these are all these studies, finally, they are observing effects, but you will see that it's very complicated to link these effects to any health effects for human. And when they are looking at the systemic consequences of these effects on the gut and the microbiota, and these consequences, it's low-grade chronic inflammation, insulin resistance, when you see the link with diabetes, and metabolic syndrome, when the link with obesity, cognitive decline with the gut-brain signaling path, exacerbation of acute inflammatory disease like pancreatitis, and a potential contribution to inflammatory bowel disease development. And so you see that it's very large in term of effect on systemic consequences. And the last thing which is complicated, and I'm sure that the EFSA will comment this later on, is the individual variability. As you know, this is a big complexity about all this study on probiotics, microbiota. There are many individual variabilities. It's really complicated to make conclusion about effects because of this variability between individuals. Just to go a little bit more in detail, when we are looking at here, this is the example of a colorectal cancer. And you see that the studies are looking at many different mechanisms, promotion of low-grade and inflammation, and you have here the evidences for each mechanism. So for instance, emulsifiers alter the composition of the gut microbiota, gut microbiota, increased tumor development. Here, this is the low-grade inflammation. We could increase the tumor development, and also reduce protective effect of dietary fibers. You know that dietary fibers have a protective effect against colorectal cancer. And there are some discussion about emulsifiers which are reducing this protective effect. And if you look at here we have looked at the pathologies, the mechanisms, and if you look at the methodologies, then you also have a huge diversity in terms of methodology which are used to evaluate this effect. So the most common methodologies, you have microbiome profiling, ex vivo human microbiota ecosystems, we test on it, is intestinal organoids, mouse model with metabolitic and inflammatory phenotyping, fecal microbiota transplantation like with probiotics, barrier integrity assays, metabolomics, high resolution imaging of mucus and gut architecture. So these are the most common methodological approaches. You see that there is a big diversity, and you have some more specialized method like a glycemic clamp, brain inflammation with brain imaging, etc. So there is a big diversity. With our tool, we can also assess for each emulsifier the level of evidence. So here you have a table based on AI trained to identify the level of evidence. It's a good indicator of the main emulsifiers which are studied. And I will not go too much in details because this is something we are not publicly publishing. So just as a conclusion, and I'm trying to be fast because I know that we are late and we can have the discussion later on, and I'm sure that the EFSA will complete my analysis. Just it's really important before interpreting this results. Our tool is not designed to replace the evaluation process of the agencies. We are just trying to reflect what is in science. But in the end, if you want to really analyze the level of evidence on each emulsifier or on the global subject, you really have to do a scientific analysis. But what we are trying to do in our mission for our clients is to help them and for food companies and researchers to anticipate emerging concern and to monitor the evolution of the scientific knowledge to help decision making. So what we are trying to do is to understand if there is a trend, if there is an interest in the scientific community, to identify what are the topic of the research, are there new topics, are there new evidences, and then in the end you need this is only AI, you need human intelligence and experts to analyze all these studies, because we're just trying to reflect what is the debate and what are the conclusions of the studies. And if I'm trying a conclusion on emulsifiers, for us, it's really an issue that needs to be monitored closely. And for us, this is the typical profile of a high sensitivity risk and a high crisis risk potential. We have an indicator that we call the crisis potential to calculate this indicator, and we know that for emulsifiers, this indicator is high. Why? Because first there is a high scientific activity. And what we see when we are trying to anticipate crisis on food and food ingredients, contaminants, or additive, is that we know that when there is a high scientific activity, there is a high risk of a crisis. And this is because you see for some issues, it's easier to publish. I don't know if of course, you have monitored the BPA, and BPA was typical or endocrine disruption. Suddenly, there is an interest about an issue, a topic, an emerging scientific subject. And then you know that if you want to go, if you're a researcher and you a researcher and you want to publish on diabetes, it's almost impossible to publish because there are so many studies on diabetes on health. But if you want to publish on endocrine disruption, on ultra-processed food, on food additives, then it's much easier because it's a trendy issue, because there are debates on it, and there are not so many scientific evidence on it. And then, so we know that there is an attraction for researchers to publish on this kind of studies. Of course, there is a large number of effects which are defined and identified. So this means that there is a large field of research which is open for new publication, and also you have a huge diversity in methodologies. When you are studying genotoxicity, then the methodologies are well established. You know how you have to process to evaluate the genotoxicity here. This is completely open, and you see many new methodologies. And then there are individual variations in effect. And then all these points means that it's very difficult to interpret these effects in terms of human health. And then the debate is very open, how you go from a very high level scientific publication to human health effects, and then to make decision. For you, it's really complicated because there's no standardized method, there are no thresholds. So, okay, when you want to assess genotoxicity, you know to proceed here. How do you make decision? How do you interpret these results? And there is the ongoing debate, and it has been mentioned by the first intervenant. There is the debate on ultra-processed food. Everybody is trying to find the bad guy of the ultra-processed food, the explanation why ultra-processed food could be harmful on health. And then we know that the emulsifiers, the food additives in general, and more specifically the emulsifiers, there can be one of these candidates for the responsible of the all bad effect which is attributed to the ultra-processed food. So, well, if you ask me how to make a decision on this topic, should you ban them, limit the quantity? Well, it's a good question, and it's a difficult decision. And I will let the floor to the EFSA just to provide us more scientific insight about this debate. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Serge. It's always nice to have some kind of overview of all the science that's being published. Huh? You can feel that in modern toxicology, at least, just to assess the effects of, or to assess the hazards, not the risks, but hazards of emulsifiers. We already understand that there are so many models, cellular, animal, so many methodologies, organs and tissues of studies. You have a big inter-individual variability as well for human studies that makes it very hard to pinpoint and to draw mechanistic conclusions to correlate epidemiological results that are being found over and over between ultra-processed food or emulsifiers and health issues. So, yeah, we should be very careful, of course, when talking about new science, not going over the limits and hypotheses that are being cited by the authors. But yeah, that's the game. Thanks a lot, Serge. Marta, we can keep on. I will give you the floor for your point of view from the industry producers of ingredients.
Thank you, Fred. I hope you can all hear me properly. Yeah, can you hear me properly? Is this working?
Now, yes.
Yeah, I don't know why it was muted. Okay, perfect. And Frank and everybody, good morning and thank you for inviting me. It's really a great pleasure to be part of this communication lab on a topic where I really feel very, personally very strongly. So I will be sharing some views from my perspective, which is the industry perspective. Just allow me, before I get into the topic, to say really just a few words about Cargill, because we feel we are in We've been already operating as a company more than 160 years. We have employees across 70 countries, and we work in a global network of 125 markets, bringing together people, ideas, and resources across the world. So how is the company structure? We actually have 3 enterprise protein products and a range of ingredients and solutions, which is our food enterprise. Then we have our market agriculture and trading that connects farmers and user of grains and oil seeds. And finally, our specialized portfolio that includes animal nutrition and health, bioindustrial, and some joint ventures with other companies. So as I said, we are really uniquely placed as a connector of the food system to support our customers meet consumer needs. So let me get into really the topic of today. To a certain extent, it has already been anticipated, but what are really consumers looking for? They are looking for tasteful, affordable, convenient, natural, made with familiar ingredients, grown locally, meeting their personal needs, and I could go on forever. So we can really say that consumers want everything nowadays. And this is where the complexity is. Tasteful and affordable and convenience are 3 aspects that are really not negotiable. Without this, the food would not really be purchased and therefore survive the marketplace. But of course, they're also looking for other aspects. And what we do see is that texture is the new flavor. So consumers, particularly the younger generation, like to experiment with texture. And we see this growing trend in some geographies. In Asia, this is really driving a lot of innovation. So really texturizers and emulsifiers in specifically play a significant role. Another aspect which is very critical is ingredient familiarity. And emulsifiers are associated with industrially made food. But actually, we use emulsifiers also when we cook at home. So we add egg yolk to make cakes for the cake to stick together, and that's because of the lecithin included in the egg yolk. Or we add apples or even pectin, which is an additive that is sold to the final consumers to make jams, for the jam not to be liquid or to solidify. And we use flour and or even starch, so cornstarch or tapioca starch, to thicken sauces. And when we make a sauce and we start with roasting flour or the cornstarch in butter, we actually make modified starches, which is exactly what the industry does when the manufacturer do when we bring to the market modified starches. And this is for me a very important message to be delivered to consumers. So also to demystify and humanize these ingredients. This I'm going to dwell a little bit on the safety. For me, this is really important to remember and always keep this as a cornerstone, that food additives that are on the market are safe for the intended use. Otherwise, they wouldn't be on the market. We have a thorough assessment done by EFSA before placing any new ingredients and therefore also additives on the market. And also, the European system plans for a periodic re-evaluation to confirm safety and exposure assessment. This is only available, or it's a process that applies to Europe, which actually puts the European approval system as with the highest requirements and therefore the highest consumer protection. I'm sure that Anne-Marie will tell us much more about that. But this system actually allows us to consider whether the new safety studies that were not available when the first ingredient was put in the market, when the emulsifier was put in the market, and they need to be taken into consideration. So it's really a safety net that we have in the system to look at evolving science, but even more so, it looks at exposure assessment. It really allows us to see whether a given emulsifier is being used in higher amounts, in more to show that we do have a thorough system to explore any what do we see? So what's the challenges that we face as an industry? We actually see that there are pseudo-scientists, pseudo-experts that do their own personal assessment, additives, really undermining the work done by global and local agencies. So really the situation is that nowadays science is done by TikTokers, just to mention, not to go into other, like apps and so on, that confuse risks and hazards and just create an environment of fear mongering. Then the other aspect is also ingredient familiarity. Again, when the legislation was done, and this is also historical, it has been chosen for additives, and emulsifiers are part of this, that they need to be labeled by their chemical name, their chemical structure. Therefore, we end up with really chemically sounding names in the ingredient list, which are not consumer friendly, and consumers cannot recognize this ingredient, even though, as I said, they are probably using them every day when they cook at home. So it's not dissimilar. This has driven the trend of clean labels, where manufacturers are really trying to either use or reformulate some of these ingredients to look for ingredients with a more friendly labels. These ingredients, which are used instead of authorized emulsifiers, are not necessarily authorized for the intended use, do not have publicly disclosed data, and are potentially misleading. an example to make my point here is carrageenan. Carrageenan is extracted from seaweed, is actually historically used as Irish moss to make paddings. So again, it comes from a long tradition. The industry is just making it in a consistent quality so that it can be used by manufacturer. And it, as I said, it needs to be labeled as carrageenan. So, a proposal could be to label it as seaweed estrates, which probably would be much more friendly. Emulsifiers are used for specific technological functions and actually are indispensable, meaning that for certain foods, the foods could not be made without emulsifier. They are critical to achieve consistent texture, mouthfeel, shelf lives in products such as baked foods, sauces, dressing, and the growing trend of plant-based alternatives. When a food is being manufactured or developed, they are carefully selected for the intended use so that we really have the optimal performance. They are actually typically used in very small amounts. I would say on average 0.5, so 0.5, and can go from 0.1 to 0.7, maximum 1%. It's not that we also have a lot of emulsifier to choose from, so we really have a limited choice. And when we look at replacing those emulsifier, it becomes really challenging because the performance really depends on the complex interaction within the matrix and the processing conditions, such as temperature, shear, and ingredient ratios. So an emulsifier that works in certain condition in a certain food will not necessarily work in another food. So as I said, yes, there is really a request to find alternatives, but very often when the alternative is proposed or is found, it does not perform as well. So what this leads to is using higher amounts to have the same performance, which therefore is less optimal, but it also leads to higher cost in use for the manufacturer, and often this cost is borne by the manufacturer itself. So I would like to bring an example of a work that we have done with our customers that asked us to find solution to replace modified starch. So we also produce native starches that have emulsifier properties. So we develop, or we have the customers develop this alternative. And actually, the customers started receiving complaints from consumers that the food was not the same, so it was not performing as well as it was before. So the customer went back to modify starches, which allows them the optimal performance and also to go back to the original cost in use. So we now also see that while maybe not optimal from a labeling point of view, that manufacturers are prefer to have the optimal ingredients or emulsifiers rather than compromising on performance, which leads to consumer complaints. So just to conclude, and also really, what do we see as recommendations to enhance consumer acceptance? Emulsifiers play a significant technological function in foods and replaces this complex and not always successful, and certain foods cannot be made, so it's not that they can be eliminated altogether. We should really stop fear-mongering. Demonizing safe ingredients does not benefit the food system as a whole. On the other hand, we should communicate the role of these ingredients, the role that these ingredients play in the foods to consumers. So help them become familiar with this ingredient, and as I said, realize that they are very similar to what is being used at home. And maybe look at more friendly names to label these emulsifiers or additives in general, so that we can humanize and we can make them more familiar to consumers. So that's just a few thoughts on my side, and happy to stay on for the Q&As.
Thanks, Marta. Thanks as well for the little advices on communication. It's always good to have this point of view of ingredient manufacturers, because you guys are the ones to know when there is a higher pressure, for example, to phase out unfamiliar or artificially perceived emulsifiers. Sometimes it results in the use of other kinds of emulsifiers. Some of them could be less studied as well. Sometimes leading to the increased use of ingredient in the recipe, for example, in terms of concentration, or lower performances, technological, or in terms of shelf life or texture or taste. And often as well, a higher production cost. I'm not even talking about the potential environmental costs of phasing out certain emulsifiers, but it's all very, very complex as well from the industrial point of view, and it's always a case-by-case decision to consult and to orient your own suppliers into going towards new raw material for emulsifiers, things like this. It's not as simple as it looks from the outside, that's for sure. We'll come back to this during the discussion, and now we'll leave the floor to Anna Maria, and she will tell us about the current efficiency of the risk assessment homologation system from EFSA around food additives and specifically on emulsifiers.
Thank you. Okay, and let me share. Can you see my presentation?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So good morning or good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for inviting me to this event. So my name is Ana Rincon, and I am Senior Scientific Officer of the Food Ingredients and Packaging Unit in EFSA. And today, I will tell you a little bit what we do in EFSA, mainly related with the assessment of food additives, focus on emulsifiers, in relation with the revaluation of those that were authorized long time ago, and also with the assessment of new food additives. As you know, EFSA was created or established in 2002, as mentioned by Sophie in the first presentation, following a series of food crises with the aim to restore the confidence of the consumer in the EU food systems. So what EFSA does is to provide independent scientific advice to managers and policy makers. We provide also independent risk communication when it's needed, and promote scientific cooperation with different stakeholders. But what EFSA does not do is to develop legislation, authorize products on the market, or enforce food safety legislation, that in fact the latest one is full responsibility of the member state. Regarding the assessment of the food additive, EFSA is the responsible to perform the revaluation of all the food additives that were on the market before January 2009, and also to perform the safety assessment before a new product can be authorized in the market. Regarding the revaluation of the food additive, is a very complex process because we don't have, we can say, a link between a food additive and company, and for the reasons we need to, we can say, collect all the information from different sources. So usually that we do start with launching a call for data, so to allow any interested business operator to provide relevant data, and this means all industry, but also academia. And at the same time, we perform extensive literature share. And also that we do is a strict risk cost bias of all this evidence, because as I've seen mentioned before in another presentation by Sergi, when you do for a literature share, you are able to identify a lot of publication, but it's very important to perform a strict risk cost bias and also consider those with high quality, because even journals that are published, articles that are published in journals of high factor impact, also when you go to the publication, you can identify some weakness. So this risk cost bias appraisal is very relevant. And also during this risk assessment process, in some cases, we need to come back to the data providers to request additional data, or even in some cases, we launch another call for data when we request specific data. So finally, with all this information, the conclusion of the evaluation is concluded. And as any other opinions, all these assessments are published in our EPSA journal. But we need to say that in most of these revaluations had finished with some data gap. So this means it's identified that some data, in some cases related to the technical part of more characterization of the food additive, or how these need to be implemented in the specification that were established long time ago, or in some cases new toxicological data is needed. And for these reasons, the European Commission has established that we call is a follow-up of the revaluation program. That this implies that usually is the European Commission, the responsible to launch, we can say, the last chance to collect the data needed to address this data gap in order to finalize the assessment. So currently we have reevaluated around a little bit more than 70% of the food additives that were authorized and in the market before January 2009. Regarding the emulsifiers, we need to first clarify that in Europe, we don't have a list of emulsifiers. So emulsifiers is a functional class recognized in our regulation, but we don't list which food additives are or have this functionality. So in our regulation, we have which food additives are authorized as food colors, sweetener, and other food additives, and these can have even more than one functional class. If we check, for example, in the codes and you share for emulsifiers, you get a list of more than 120 additives, and amongst them you can identify also, for example, maltitol, xylitol, that in Europe these food additives are authorized as a sweetener. So the list of the emulsifiers, we can say it is not very clear. But in our evaluation programs, at least the European Commission clarified what in numbers are considered amongst different functional class that could be emulsifier, stabilizer, or gelling agents. And the evaluation of all these substances has been complete. Here I show some examples of the outcome of this revaluation for food, we can say, substance considered as emulsifiers, very common, that are the case of mono and diglyceridose fatty acid, cellulose. And as you can see, in all these cases, the conclusion was that there is not need for a numerical ADI or numerical acceptable daily intake. The reason can vary from one food additive to other. In some cases is because the substance is considered to be hydrolyzed to components that are natural in our body or in our food. In other cases, because there is not absorption. In all cases, because there is not any concern on genotoxicity, and the toxicological study that has been performed, even high, we can say, doses, has not shown adverse effect. And there are other cases that, for example, the case of this polyglycerol polyresinolate 8, In this case, for example, was established a numerical acceptable daily intake. So there are different conclusions depending of the nature and the data available. But all of this revaluation finished with some recommendations regarding the amendment of the specifications. At the time of the revaluation, were identified studied with some emulsifiers that for which were reported that they alter gut microbiota, promote gut inflammation. EFSA recognized the importance of considering the role of gut microbiota in the risk assessment, mainly in the food additive, taking into account that there is a possible impact in the gut microbiota composition. However, a clear understanding of the significance of changes in structure and functionality of the microbiome and their effect on health is not yet elucidated. So further research is ongoing and recommendation on how to integrate this evidence in the risk assessment are being developed. In fact, in EFSA was published in 2024 what we call a roadmap that indicate a research strategy to develop decision for the future incorporation of this evidence on gut microbiome data into a specific legislation in order to be considered in the risk assessment. But this project is ongoing. That as I mentioned, that in all this revaluation, there was practically for all of them the recommendation to amend the specification, and for several of these revaluation has been even this follow-up also performed, and in some cases the recommendation has been included in the amendment of the Commission regulation with the specification of the food additive. As you can see highlighted in yellow, in some cases these amendments include better definition of the food additive, lowering the limit of toxic elements, or including new limits for impurity that were not identified previously. It could be the free NCPDs or glycidol due to the toxicological concern of these impurities, but ensuring that they're present at this level and considering the exposure of this food additive, there is not any safety concern. Regarding the new food additive, the process is very different compared to the revaluation. Is when an industry wants to place a new product on the market, first contact the European Commission and provide the dossier. And is the European Commission the responsible to know or to evaluate is the proposed food additive meet one of the criteria to be authorized as a food additive. If this is the case, then the European Commission requests to EFSA to perform the safety assessment. We have 9 months to complete the safety assessment, but during these 9 months, we have the opportunity, or because it's needed, to request additional data in order to complete or to finalize the assessment and to conclude. And this is that we call a stop the clock process, and this implies that during this time is giving a time to the applicant to provide clarification or to generate new data as needed. One of the, we can say, recent emulsifiers that has been included in the legislation is, for example, these oat lecithins that the assessment in EFSA recommends to be considered like a new food additive, despite the conclusion was in line with the authorized food additive, that was these lecithins, and it was concluded that no numerical ADI was needed. But some recommendations on how to implement the specification in the legislation were done. Another example of other product that was evaluated by EFSA and could be authorized by the, we can say, European Commission member states as an emulsifiers is the pea fiber concentrate that is extracted from side stream of pea starch production, and for which the conclusion in EFSA was that also there was no need for a numerical ADI, and there was not a safety concern at the proposed use and use levels. As you can see, this dossier was received in 2023, but the conclusion was, or the publication adoption took place in January this year, because during the risk assessment, there were several stop or clock process. So because additional data was requested, mainly regarding the information on the characterization of the product. Similar situation is for another opinion from another product that was finalized in July this year and probably will be authorized as a new emulsifier. That is this tocopherol polyethylene glycol succinate, for which also the panel conclude that there is not any safety concern at the proposed use and use levels. And as you can see, is another case when the dossier was received years ago. The conclusion took place some months ago, because also during the risk assessment process, several times was requested additional data, mainly regarding characterization of the product again. And another examples of ongoing assessment that we have, probably for emulsifiers, but I repeat, so in our dossiers, we don't know if, or the applicant don't indicate what is the functionality. In some cases is indicated, but in fact, the functionality is not out of the remit of the risk assessment, because for us, that is important is to know in which food categories and at which levels will be used, because this allows us to calculate the exposure in order to conclude on the safety. Some of these examples, as you can see here, could be pectin-rich extract from coffee Arabica, or fiber extract from this white button mushroom, or tamarind seed polysaccharide. So all these are ongoing assessments. Some of them, as you can see by the question number given also in the presentation, you can see that our dossiers received years ago. And once again, they are still ongoing because additional data request is asked in order, in particular, for the characterization of the food product. In the case of this pectin-rich extract, is you follow the minute of the EFSA panel on food additive and flavorings. This assessment was discussed at the panel a couple of weeks ago and will be finalized in the next meeting. So based a little bit in all our experience with these dossiers, in fact, we have a new updating of the guidance for the preparation of the food additive has been prepared in order to give to the industry a better indication what kind of information is relevant, mainly, or not relevant, is needed, mainly for the characterization of the product under assessment. Because we have seen that the current guidance that we have, that were in place from 2012, were more focused on, we can say, single chemical substance, while as you can see from all this slide, the trend for a new food additives are more related to complex mixtures. And in some cases, you can say this, for the names that I gave you in the previous slide, you can consider that are, we can say, perceived as natural components, but we need to be sure that on the composition of this product, because to note very well that all the components that are in this complex mixture, to be ensured that there is not components that have a certain toxicological concern, or which is the level of these components, in order to ensure that when this will be authorized as a food additive, should not be any safety concern. So for these reasons, our aim is that with this new guidance, we will be able to receive dossier with more complete characterization data that will help to accelerate the risk assessment. It is clear that further research is required to understand the effect of the gut microbiome in order to incorporate the evidence into the risk assessment, but we are not now in a position on how to include that. And to be sure that, we perform a comprehensive safety assessment for both authorized on new emulsifiers, and when it's needed, even can be an update of the risk assessment when there is new evidence emerge, because this has been cases for other food additives. But also I would like to clarify that the publication of a new publication cannot be considered like an evidence that can change the final conclusion, because the conclusion usually is the result of a weight of all the evidence that are available. Because the aim of our assessment is for sure to ensure a high level of the protection of the human health in relation to the food. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ana Maria, for this overview. I think you answered a lot of questions that the attendees were asking themselves. We've seen that most of the new emulsifiers that are being recently submitted for approval, at least for risk assessments, are from natural origin or natural extracts. So we really see this trend as well going further than just the science and the media as well. It's in the ingredients that are being submitted for approval. We've seen as well that this risk assessment process for approval and reapproval is based on the most recent regulatory scientific tests available. And that, of course, the whole European frame is evolving with its time. EFSA is currently working on how to incorporate new methodologies, new models, such as microbiome science and microbiome effects, of course. And the more evidence emerges, the more likely it is to be for us to see new regulatory requirements in the next decade, for example. But yes, science takes time to be published, and it takes even more time to be incorporated in regulatory frameworks. But that's for the safety of all of us. So it's hard for non-scientists to understand how long it takes for exploratory science to turn into regulatory science. But we are really happy for you guys to actually give us some heads up regularly. Okay, right now, so thanks a lot, the four of you guys. We can review the questions that have been asked in the audience for all of you guys. So Anna, Marta, Serge, and Sophie, do we have some questions? We already received some questions before the webinar. Okay, so we have a question for Serge, I think. Do you think in all of your studies, are there some interventional studies on humans as well with realistic exposure, or right now the new trends are based mostly on animal and cellular studies?
Well, it's mostly on animal studies, yes, or experimental studies. Yeah. We are not
Okay.
many human studies.
Okay. So it leads to Laura. Next question as well is how it's mostly for you, Anna Maria, but as well for you, Serge. How do you think that we will include more and more epidemiological studies into maybe into the regulatory framework? Maybe it's more for you, Anna Maria. Are you guys working on this, trying to see how to include epidemiological evidence on humans
Yes,
into?
in fact, there is so if these studies are available, we are included. These studies, as for any other, they go through this risk cost bias analysis. And for example, if you are interested, so this is because there are these available studies mainly on sweeteners. All these studies are being considered in the revaluation of the sweetener. And in fact, we have a protocol on how to perform the risk cost bias and how to include this evidence from the human studies in the risk assessment process. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna Maria. Another question for Serge. Have you looked into what is driving the research interest in emulsifiers? Which kind of questions are the more asked to raise interest in emulsifiers? Is it safety related? Is it technology based? Is it something else?
You mean in the scientific publications?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's difficult to answer because our database is focused on health. So
Okay.
we don't look at a technological database or technological studies. So, well, yes, in our database, it's mainly on health, but it's due to our methodology.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think, of course, I mean, in your database, you are looking at eco-toxicological issues as well. And this is being taken into account as well in EFSA's evaluation process. It's not only about health either. Um, as well, we had some other questions that have been asked before the webinar. I have one for you, Sophie. We we would like to know what is your opinion on the current discourse on homemade food or the promotion of familiar, natural ingredients, of course, things that you can find in your own kitchen, and which kinds of emotional responses do they usually raise those kinds of discourse?
Thank you. So indeed, homemade food is more and more raised into political policies, or more and more brought into political policies. And it raises the question of inequality in terms of resources. Like, are we all able to cook at home the same way? And in France, we know that 36% of poor people are saying that they don't have the equipment at home to cook. So the feeling it can raise can be guilt on a way, because everyone doesn't have the same resources to cook, and especially the women in the most precarious situations, the risk is to make them feel guilt because they are not able to cook all the time for their children. They don't have access to raw foods, to fresh foods, because we know also that fresh fruits and vegetables are less consumed by the most vulnerable. So the question is how to explain, like, the question of health, but also the question of how do we give to everyone the same resources in order to be able to follow the guidelines.
Yeah, such a complex topic, huh? Marta, we already had a question as well for you. Is why do you think, from an industry point of view, that that consumers need to have at least a little idea of the complexity of the food science and the interactions between ingredients in order to accept food processing as a whole, even if here we are talking only about emulsifiers, but why do you think it's important to actually get a bit into the food science itself, huh?
Well, good question. It's probably for transparency, maybe, because at the same time, it's not in a. It's not that I'm going to use a strong word, but against their interest, so that those ingredients, and not only emulsifiers, are there for a given purpose, and they play a functional role in the food, and therefore that they are needed for the consumer to enjoy the foods that they like the way that they like it. So for me, it's to be really transparent in the communication to consumers, but it needs to be done in a way that it's understood, and therefore the way that is done, it's very important. And in the broader debate that we already see, we are now seeing some companies that are choosing to communicate about some of their ingredients. And again, I'm going to go back to my modified starch examples, where they've chosen to put on the pack what modified starches do. So yes, it's happening actually in reality.
Okay, so maybe in the future, if we don't want to see the same thing happening to emulsifiers, the same thing that happened to sweeteners, for example, maybe it's time for all of us, all stakeholders united, to get a bit into the food science, tries to explain maybe with analogies or with the help of motion design or with technological aid to explain what those ingredients do when we bake them, when we mix them together, maybe get a bit into the chemical nature of them without being sounding too sciencey or sounding too expert, but maybe link it with the cooking experience that people actually do at home. That's the point for the mayonnaise or the sauces that you were saying earlier. Yeah, of course. And then we have maybe one last point for Anna Maria, just in your comprehension of the mediatic system, of course, in Europe, especially with the ultra-processed food trend, what do you think is the most important point or points that the public should understand about EFSA's evaluation of emulsifiers and of food additives as a whole, to give this impression of safety that all scientists have when they read regulatory science, but maybe that is not perceived by the general public?
Okay, probably that I tried to mention is that the conclusion of the safety is based on a weight of evidence. So it's not based on the evidence published in a paper that could attract a lot of media attention. So when you do the conclusion of the risk assessment, you need to consider all the evidence together, as I mentioned, after a strict risk of bias, and the conclusion is based on that. So in some cases, our aim is to establish, if possible, a health guidance value. And in some cases, we are not able because probably the toxicity database is not robust enough. And in this case, we find other approaches to conclude on the safety. In the case, evidently, of new food additive, in some cases, even has been negative opinions. So for the reasons, the product never arrives to the market. But just to be sure this, because that our perception is that there are continuously publication on the effect produced. And I think it's very relevant that the academia continues working on that. But it's important to consider that we need to see what this publication impact on what we call biological relevance and how to consider all this in a whole weight of evidence. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Anna Maria. It's very important as well for us to understand that it's not only about food science itself, but it's about science of science itself, how to understand that regulatory science and food risk assessment frameworks are based on the evolution of science. They're trying to keep up to date as well. And this part of the weight of evidence is something that we perceive in all of our debates around food risks as a whole, not only about ultra-processed food, but as well about food safety, chemical and microbiological risk assessments as well. And it's important to fight against scientific misinformation as much as it is to produce educational content on food technology, of course. It's what we are trying to do. Thanks, everyone. We are a bit late. We are 10 minutes late. I hope you guys are not too hungry yet. Be assured that you will find the replay of all of these events on EUFIC's website, and we will send each one of you in the attendance by mail all the content when it's available with our teams. If you guys need a certificate of attendance, please ask us individually through EUFIC's email. And I think that's it. Huh? Thank you, the four of us. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think it was fruitful. At least we did receive a lot of data for us to be able to build recommendations in the next workshop communication lab on emulsifiers. So thanks a lot, everyone.